Recording in progress. Okay, we are going to start the meeting. It is 7:37. And we're calling the meeting to order. Do we have approval of the agenda or are there changes?
I'm fine.
Any changes? Sorry, I didn't hear you, Phil. I think you said something, but I didn't hear it. It wasn't loud.
I'm okay with changes. I'm no changes. I mean, no changes for me.
Okay. Okay. Hi, Jerry Lee. Anything?
No changes
And
for me,
Mario?
thank you, President.
No.
Okay, and Donna?
No changes. Sorry, I was having.
Okay, and we have,
difficulties.
okay, we can see you though, and we hear you, so it's all good.
Hopefully
Stephen
nothing bad.
Piskowski is not present. Okay, Stephen Piskowski is not present for this meeting. So we have 4 council members present. Okay. How about, okay, so the agenda is approved without changes. And let's move to the minutes from from March. Any changes? Let's go Jerry Lee.
No changes, thank you.
Okay, Mario.
No changes, Jackie.
Okay, thank you. Phil.
No changes.
Okay. Minutes are approved as is. Thank you, everybody. Okay, it is 7:38 for the record. Are there any presentations by residents? Okay, I think that silence means none. And let's move to action items at 7:39. The adoption of the ordinance for the FY23 budget. I'd like to defer to Town Manager Barb Matthews. Barb, if you would start this, if there's any, you go ahead. If there's any discussion, we can have that.
Okay, just very briefly, the ordinance is before you tonight for adoption. As you all directed at your March meeting when the ordinance was introduced, the prior year carryover, which is line 1.0, was increased from 125 to 140,000. The household assessment for refuse service was increased from the initially proposed $345 to $395 per household, given the likelihood of fuel surcharge payments in FY 2023. This also increased municipal trash collection revenues, which is line 4.0, by $18,050. There was similarly an increase in trash collection, a slight difference, $18,000 based on revenues. There's just a slight rounding issue. And then also $15,000 was added to line 14.2 for a pilot composting program. All of these changes resulted in a very slight adjustment in the transfer to the capital accounts, which is line 20.11. When I say minimal, I mean minimal. It was only $50. So those were the changes that you all directed at your March meeting, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you all have.
Thank you, Barb. No questions from me.
No questions for me.
You're too thorough, Barb. No questions.
I try.
Thanks for putting this together, Barb. Do we have a motion
I move.
to
I
adopt?
move to adopt the updated budget as read by Barb.
I
Is
will
there a
second
second?
that. This is Jerry Lee, I'll second that.
All in favor, just show your hands, or we'll,
Aye.
that would be Mark. Okay, and Donna, are you there? Okay, great. And sounds like all is approved. So Motion is passed. Thank you. Okay, let's go to the next action item. We're making adjustments to the FY 2022 reserve accounts. This is again based on a discussion from last month. So Barb, would you like to lead us through that, please?
Yes, as Kaki just mentioned, the ordinance was introduced at your meeting in March. The only changes that you directed were some changes to the whereas clauses to try to just clarify why we were making certain changes. Those can be seen in the last two whereas clauses, specifically that the Penn Place tenant security deposits reserve account was reduced to reflect the current amounts being held. And the last whereas clause references that the required reimbursement under the Win case has been satisfied, which allowed that reserve account to be closed out. So other than that, there have been no changes other than the ones I just outlined, which you all directed at your March meeting.
Is there any discussion? Okay, could we have a motion? Would anyone like to make a motion?
I'll make a
To
motion
adopt
to
this?
adopt,
Okay, Mario, all right.
sorry, adopt, motion to adopt the ordinance, is it 22-3?
I'll
Right.
second it.
And Donna seconded. Okay, all in favor? Let's see. This is so much easier. Phil and Jerry Lee. Okay, I see the hand by Phil. Jerry Lee, are you in favor?
In favor, thank you.
Okay, so that's a unanimous and the motion is passed. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Barb. Okay, next one is the adoption of resolution number 2022-1. And this is in recognition of Butch, that's Robert Frost, for his service to the town of Garrett Park. And I will be reading the resolution. So, whoops, pulled out the wrong one. My apology. There it is. Okay, this is thanking Butch for his service to the town. So whereas Robert Butch Frost was employed by the town of Garrett Park as of October 26, 1992. And whereas Mr. Frost has deep family ties to Garrett Park and cares greatly about the community, which was reflected in the quality of his work. And whereas throughout his career, Mr. Frost was highly regarded for his work ethic and dedication. And whereas Mr. Frost's position required him on occasion to work nights and weekends to keep roads clear of snow, fallen trees and broken limbs. And whereas Mr. Frost performed these duties without complaint, always putting the interests of the town first. And as Mr. Frost paid careful attention to the town's many trees and flowers, playing an instrumental role in preserving and enhancing Garrett Park's beauty. And whereas during his tenure with the town, Mr. Frost developed close personal relationships with town residents of all ages. And whereas Mr. Frost enjoyed interacting with the town's youngest residents, enthusiastically showing them how various pieces of equipment worked. And whereas Mr. Frost will retire from the town of Garrett Park as of May 5th, 2022. And whereas the mayor and the town council wish to acknowledge Mr. Frost's almost 30 years of exemplary service to the town of Garrett Park by adoption of this resolution and by the planting of a red bud tree in his honor. So now therefore be it resolved that the town council of the town of Garrett Park, in conjunction with Mayor Kaki, hereby extend its sincere appreciation to Robert Butch Frost for his contributions to the town of Garrett Park government and his dedicated commitment to the betterment of the Garrett Park community, and wishes him the best in this next chapter of life. This is an authorization. It would be good just to hear an oral agreement by all council to make this a resolution. So could I hear yays from everybody or?
I agree.
Yay.
Thank you.
An emphatic yay.
Yes.
Agreed, emphatic yay.
Okay, thank you. Council agrees. All right. Motion for the resolution is passed. And I want to just say a sincere thanks to Butch for all his dedication, his humor, the dog treats that he gave to every dog and then some, and just for being there for all of us. We will miss him very much. So thank you to Butch. Okay, the next action item is an authorization that partnerships with the AmWins Group Benefits for Voluntary Retiree Healthcare Program. Barb, if you could take us through that, please.
Certainly. I think as the mayor and council are aware, we participate in the local government insurance trust, more commonly referred to as Legit. Legit has had a partnership for a number of years with AmWins Group Benefits, and AmWins offers a 65 plus Medicare supplement insurance program that provides retirees with medical and prescription drug options not currently available in the individual marketplace. This program, if authorized by the mayor and town council, would give the town's retired staff members better options while also helping them to navigate Medicare by providing a simplified enrollment process. Included in your agenda packet is sort of an overview of the AmWins program. I did want to note that if you all choose to authorize this, there is no cost to the town to participate in the AmWins program, and AmWins would handle the entirety of the program administration, including the direct billing of any retirees who choose to sign up, basically sending out renewal information, customer service, or member communications. So from my perspective, this offers any of our retired staff, including Mr. Frost, perhaps, kind of an option to explore some Medicare supplement options. Once again, there's no cost to the town and there's no administrative burden to the town staff. So from my perspective, it's sort of a win-win. If you all were to authorize our partnership with AmWins this evening, I would basically provide them with the necessary employee census data. And basically the program's effective date would be July 1st of 2022. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you all have.
So in theory, this could go back to anyone who wasn't working for the town, including temporaries, or is it just full-time?
I think it was envisioned, Phil, as being just benefited staff, but that's certainly something I could explore with AmWins.
Well, I'm also thinking of some people who used to work for the town who've long since retired, but may be interested. I have no idea.
Yeah, I can certainly ask that question. And if AmWins is agreeable, certainly, could basically try to find the necessary information to add those individuals to the census.
Okay.
So Barb, I think we need a motion by council to approve the authorization.
That would be helpful, Kathy, yes.
Okay, is there any motion?
I'll
Council?
motion to approve this authorization as presented by Town Manager Matthews, interim town manager.
Thank you, Jerry Lee. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
All right, Phil, thank you. All in favor then? Donna, Mario?
Aye.
All right, and everybody else. Yeah, okay, thank you. So approved and passed. Okay, last action item, decision of the standard allowance option for the ARPA reporting. Barb, if you'd like to walk us through this, or
Sure.
Donna?
Donna, do you have a preference?
Barbara,
or-
Barbara, by all means, please.
Okay. I think as everyone is aware, obviously, that we are the recipient of ARPA funds. We received our first tranche of funding in FY 2022 and expect to receive the second tranche in FY 2023. everyone is required, or most entities are required to file their first report under the program by April 30th, and that's something that I will be taking care of for you. One of the beneficial provisions of the final rule that took effect on April 1st is that local governments can choose a standard allowance of up to $10 million in revenue loss, regardless of your actual loss of revenue. Under this option, the U.S. Department of Treasury presumes that up to $10 million in revenue has been lost due to the public health emergency, and any governmental entity is permitted to use that amount, obviously not to exceed the actual award amount, to fund what is referred to in the final rule as government services. The standard allowance that was adopted by Treasury in the final rule was enacted in response to a lot of comments received, particularly from local governments, small local governments, because it offered a simple, convenient way to determine revenue loss. And certainly I think Garrett Park would fall into that group. So as I mentioned, we are required to file our first annual report before April 30th of this year. As part of that process, a local government has to indicate whether it is choosing the standard allowance or not. It would be my recommendation that the town elect to use the standard allowance. It greatly simplifies our reporting requirements and also the compliance requirements. So I was just looking for direction this evening, whether or not you agree with that recommendation, because I do hope to start working on the report filing later this week. Donna, is there anything you wanted to add?
No, I concur. We had discussed the standard allowance, or had reviewed the standard allowance a couple months ago, and I had agreed with your stance that is would be the easiest and the most effective way of going forward.
Sherry Lee, I have a question. Is there any potential downside to planning to use the standard allowance? It doesn't seem like it from what you presented, but I just wanted to double check.
No,
Any risk?
I don't think there's any downside at all, Jerry Lee. In talking to, certainly some of our fellow local small municipalities here in Montgomery County, as well as participating in some of the office hours that the state has been holding. My sense is pretty much anyone who's on the smaller side and didn't suffer up to $10 million in revenue loss is picking the standard allowance, mainly because you don't have to go through and document anything. It's just sort of presumed that you lost up to your award amount.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a concern or question, as the case may be. It says, quote unquote, to fund government services. If we put it into a capital project, or be it sewers, town hall will probably seem a likely cause. Those aren't quote unquote services, are they?
Right.
Yeah, actually, Phil, if I may, so the original, and Donna, feel free to jump in here because I know you've looked at this in great detail. So if I misspeak, feel free to correct me. But under the interim rule, Phil, one of the questions that got raised was how broadly could the funds be used? And I think you just cited the ones that were outlined in the interim rule. So those would be things like water and sewer utilities. Broadband was another major emphasis. What the final rule did, and the use of the term government services, and I put that in the memo in quotes because that's actually the terminology the U.S. Treasury Department uses, it actually broadened the use of the funds. So I think some of the things you just mentioned would be considered typical governmental services. And we will be having the first meeting of the Recovery Funds Task Force Thursday night. Town Attorney Ron Bolt will be actually specifically addressing allowable uses of ARPA funds, but it's quite broad in the final rule.
Okay, so they don't have a definition for government services, because I see services being something other than a capital project.
No, I think both the interim rule in a more narrow sense, as well as the final rule, basically defined government services as almost anything that governments spend money on routinely. So that would include capital projects.
Okay, fair enough.
Yes, and I think in essence, it was also giving space to municipalities that weren't moving or were afraid, perhaps concerned that they wouldn't be able to spend the funds in a reasonable amount of time. Or more specifically, within the time frame allowed under ARPA funds. No, Phil, I'm sorry, maybe it's just me, I can't hear him.
What? Do we need a
Oh,
a
now I can.
motion to authorize or how do we?
I think either a motion or just sort of by consensus. I just want to make sure that what I'm marking on the reporting, it's not something that changes once you make your election, it's binding. So I felt like it was at least an issue that I should bring up and make sure that we were all in agreement before I file the report.
I would say as long as services includes the ability to do capital projects, which you've indicated it does, then I'm fine. And I would make a motion that we accept filing as the under the standard allowance.
Yeah, and if I may just clarify, the use of ARPA funds for government services is the same, irrespective of whether or not we choose the standard allowance or actually choose to go through the process of documenting revenue. So I apologize if the way I characterized that in the memo was at all confusing.
Well, so I'll move that we adopt that again, that we adopt that we accept the standard allowance and file as standard allowance then.
Is there a second?
Am I allowed to second? Is it conflict of interest, I would think?
Is there? No, there's no.
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 You're good,
Well, if
Donna.
there's not, well, then I would second, please.
Okay. And then all in favor, that would be Jerry Lee and Mario. All
Aye.
right, see the hands. Okay, all right. Unanimous, passed. Thank you. Okay. 7:59, and we're now going to start with town updates. Looks like I'm up first, and I am just bringing to, I guess, the attention for the record anyway, the committee appointment terms. There were a couple things we made changes on just to keep the staggering of membership. And so I am moving on the Parks and Open Spaces. I am placing Jean Haran for 3 years and Suzanne Welker for 2 years. And that would allow Naveed McCoy to be 4 years, Jack Mandel 3 years, and Spencer Morrison 1 year. So that's the changes there. I think there's no changes on the land use committee. And I think on the budget committee, we swapped a couple where we have Naveed will have 3 years, Stephen Welker 3 years, Frank McGuire will be 2 years, and Ari Haiju will be 2 years. Ken Schwartz had resigned, so we have just 4 members on the budget work group. That's all I wanted to make mention of. That's my update.
Kaki, I did have a question.
Yeah.
I believe that you and Donna named a committee for the ARPA funds, but we have not yet received a report of the membership of that committee. Could we get that listing
I think
tonight?
we're going to get to Donna's, because I'm not I didn't make the committee. I didn't choose. So we'll leave that to Donna's update. Okay. Is that okay?
Okay, that's fine.
Donna,
Thank you.
You can speak to that, Donna. Okay. All right. So Jerry Lee, let's go to the Arboretum.
Okay, very quick update. The town crew is continuing with spring planting. There will be 15 new trees. 10 were deferred from the fall. The committee is still working on the invasive vine removal contract development with Barb in the town office. And then finally, the committee was not yet able to elect a new chair, so they will be doing that on April 20th. We had some folks who weren't able to make it to the last meeting. And we'd like to thank Jenny Kravanik for her service as the committee chair since February of 2020, and also Chris Keller, who is moving on from the committee, for their service.
Yes, thank you very much.
Any
So then-
questions on Arboretum?
I have one, Jerry Lee. I wonder, I don't know if it's gotten to the attention of the Arboretum Committee yet, although I've spoken with a couple people. Is there a chance that the Arboretum could look at plantings for the lower end of Rokeby that had been cleared incorrectly during the stormwater erosion mitigation project, so that we could reinstate some of the trees and the undergrowth or understory? All that had been cleared out, so by accident. So we'd like to sort of reinstate some of that forest.
I see. I tell you what, I'll suggest that we put that on the agenda for April 20. And if there's any additional information that you can share with the committee ahead of time, that would be great.
Sure, and Phil is aware of what happened down there, so you know, having him come back and look at it again, Phil Schulp, and so is Phil Normandy. Yeah, it would be good to get eyes on there and see what can be done to reinstate some of that forest. Thank you. Okay,
Okay, sure. Thank you.
you're up again there, Jerry Lee, for the Strathmore redevelopment. If you'd like to share something.
Yes, as we shared via the town listserv, the hearing examiner did publish his report on April 6th, which goes to the county council. His recommendation is to approve the local map amendment, which would allow the development to go forward with the inclusion of the assisted living center on the property. And as Mayor Kaki put out on the listserv this week, there will be a community meeting hosted by the developers, a virtual meeting on April 19th from 7 to 8 p.m. where people can learn more about the preliminary plan approval process. So even if the county council approves the local map amendment, residents will still have opportunities throughout this preliminary plan and final plan approval process to provide input. And I think that's really a good place for us to provide input. A lot of the input that we were suggesting during the earlier part of the process, often we would hear back the comment from the planning department folks that these were things that could be considered during that preliminary plan approval process. So it's a good opportunity for residents to weigh in about design issues that they're concerned about.
Thank
So
you.
more
And
to
Jerry
come.
Lee, okay, and just for clarification, if I understand it correctly, the April 19th meeting also provides a review of what the site plans at this point in time are to look like, so people could hear about what the design is going to be like and to ask questions about that. All right. Okay.
Correct. Yeah.
All right, good. All right, thank you, Jerry Lee.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
So Jerry Lee, along the same lines as what Kaki just mentioned, or Mayor Kaki just mentioned, are you aware of any major changes from what was presented earlier?
I'm not aware of any changes from what was presented earlier.
Neither.
Given that
Yeah.
they weren't really given any stipulations to make any further changes by the hearing examiner, I wouldn't expect any changes at this stage. But it's possible the changes could happen during the preliminary plan process.
Okay, thank you
Well,
very much.
Jerry Lee, we had as a town, right, and you had put forth, we had asked for some things to be considered, right, with extended
Mhm.
sidewalks and better traffic management and maybe even a different egress or exit. So for all that, there's been nothing to accommodate any of that at this point in time, right?
Right. The biggest change that neighbors were asking for was some sort of either pedestrian or roadway egress out directly to Tuckerman Lane. But the hearing examiner agreed with the developers that the topography does not, and also the planning department, that is not really a feasible option.
Okay, yeah, that's too bad. Okay, Donna, if you don't mind, would you like to give us an update about the American Rescue Plan? And you could also tell us who's on your committee.
Of course, and never would mind, of course. Yeah, just making sure my microphone is working. It keeps going in and out. My apologies.
We hear you loud and
Yes,
clear.
wonderful. Thank you so much for confirming. So yes, as you had heard Barb mentioned earlier, we have our first preliminary meeting scheduled for this Thursday at 7 with Ron Bolt to go over what the approved, well, not approved, what the allowances are under ARPA, as well as you know, an introduction to the members themselves, to each other, and an understanding of what the task force is set out to do. And in short, that task force is set out to not only to gather ideas and feedback as to what the town can most benefit from in regard to the ARPA funds in its use, but also the process to establish in order to make sure that the process is clear and transparent and understood for anyone and everyone who's going to apply for those ARPA funds, which we anticipate is what the process would be, whether it's outside or internal ideas for RFAs, RFPs to be put out for projects within the town. The members of this task force, Carolyn Shaker, Barbara Jackson, Dick Morgan, Kavitha Nalambathi, Navid Naikui, and Pat Maloney. I want to thank them all for graciously and generously offering their time to participate in the task force, and I look forward to working with them all.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask for some clarification, Donna? Not to put you on the spot, but
Not at all.
just want to make sure we're all on the same page here as far as what the mission or the focus is for your task force. You, if I understand, you and the members are going to develop a process for how to, I guess, accept or assess, or both, what kind of projects the town might want to do with this money. But as far as like RFPs and any kind of grant, those things would come later if the whole council and, you know, the town manager want to go that direction. Is that correct? Because I don't want to jump the gun here.
That is correct. Yes. As a matter of
Okay,
fact,
so
that is
you're just
correct.
gonna,
That is,
okay.
that was just a suggestion, a recommendation or a suggestion or a thought process of where this
Okay.
would go, but primarily to
Okay.
ensure that there's transparency in what this process is.
Okay.
And the decisions behind, the decisions and the recommendations I will make to council on
Great.
what process we can use and what, in fact, ideas that we could,
Okay.
you know, apply the ARPA funds to.
Okay, all right. I think that's good. All right, great.
Can I answer anyone else's questions?
All right, thank you, Donna. We
No
look
problem.
forward to
Thank
hearing
you.
more about this. I know everybody's anxiously waiting to hear about more things. So great.
Yes, thank you everyone for their patience. It's been a bit of a, as you could all imagine, organizing, being available is always a bit of a challenge. And we thank
Sure.
you all also for meeting late, as well as for Ron Bolt, who will meet with us at that hour.
Great. Okay. Mario, you're up on archives. Want to share anything with us?
Real quick, sorry about the background noise. Sure. A couple of quick things from Claire. First of all, she's working on a new exhibit for the post office, looking at the highlights of Garrett Park from 1890 to present. A lot to work on, so she's kind of diving through that. She's also working on a new hybrid, so it'll be in-person, physical, and virtual exhibit talking about the story of Garrett Park through actual objects. So not just
That'll be neat.
That'd be kind of cool.
Yeah.
And then I think she's had some meeting this week. She may have had it already with some of the new archive members, as some of those folks have now stepped into that position. So it's good to have some new folks there. And that's pretty much it. As always, Claire does a great job, as they all do in the archives, keeping our history vibrant and shared well. That's it.
Great. Thank you, Mario. Phil, Parks and Open Spaces.
So for Parks and Open Spaces, we've sent out a doodle poll. I'd like to thank Barb for help with that. And we're looking to try and set up a meeting sometime between basically next week and the end of the month. So we can do our kickoff meeting, get going on things. And then we'll discuss some, principally at least to bring everybody up to speed with, hopefully, I assume you can hear me, bring everybody up to speed with the town, individual town parks, what's going on, and then I'll look forward in terms of things we've got coming up, everything from the dog park to Yandell Park and so forth. So.
Okay, Phil, can you tell us, was the doodle poll arranged for meetings, or was it to get an idea of the type of park and open space kind of projects? What was the doodle poll about?
Meeting.
Meetings to get together. Okay, all right, great.
Yep.
All right.
And the rest.
And lastly, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say the rest of the stuff was what will be discussed at the meeting. I kind of threw a little agenda in there.
Okay. And then we have last update at 8:13 is sidewalk improvements. Do you want to take that one, Phil?
Yeah, I'll take at least part of it. So we've got a couple things going on here. One of them is we've got, excuse me, I got some background noise, but so we've got some work that'll be starting hopefully next week on the Oxford sidewalk. And this is going to be for the stretch that runs from Montrose to Kenilworth and a little bit along the edge of Oxford and Kenilworth where it turns the corner to go into the school. So their contractors have indicated they'll be looking at starting something hopefully at the end of this week, with the idea that they would be done quickly, hopefully before the kids go back to school. We shall see. One of the things we were looking at was some stuff to do with a curb cut, or I'm sorry, a handicap ramp that's right on the corner of Oxford and Kenilworth, because the existing one is too steep. It's abutted with telephone pole. It's kind of not very good. And there's two trains of thought. One is that we work with the homeowner there to see if we can get some type of easement, but I probably don't think that's going to happen. So most likely what we expect to happen is that we're going to eliminate that particular handicap ramp, because you've already got areas where you can get on, especially right where we cross the street there at Kenilworth, right where Oxford comes up to Kenilworth. You can cross the street there. So
Right on the east side.
yeah, we'll eliminate that and then put in a little bit of a wall there to kind of bring the grade flat. And so that's the change that I expect to see there. The other thing was we've got some information now from Jason, so I'm going to be reaching out to the Arboretum Committee, and I'll be reaching out to Lizzie Glidden Boyle, who indicated an interest in plantings and so forth, and what to do as we look at putting that new sidewalk piece in to replace the existing one that goes basically from Waverly down to Town Hall.
No, you mean Penn
I'm
Place.
sorry, not Penn Place. I'm sorry about that. Penn Place,
Right.
you're right. So, there's a lot of stuff going on there, big embankment. There's been some ideas of what we could do, what we might do with some of the trees and so forth. So stay tuned for that.
The only thing I might add to that, Phil, from what I heard today, is the idea, given the very steepness of the bank on that section of sidewalk between Penn Place and the basketball court and tennis courts, is the 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 inclusion that the sidewalk is currently already above the curb, and it will end up going even higher. So there's a suggestion from Jason to create a knee wall along that side with a railing. I don't know how definitive that will be, but that's kind of what he's looking at now, and in order to, because it'll be so high, you know, for ADA to keep that with a railing and a knee wall.
Exactly. And the upside, thanks for mentioning that. I forgot, but yeah, we'll have to do something, and a railing's going to have to be there, or maybe we can get away with doing, I don't say get away with, but we might be able to make it more aesthetically pleasing if it's possible to put up the same thing we did over in Waverly with a little raised edge there.
Yeah, the difference is that one has that bank over there on Montrose along the tennis court as you head over towards Claremont, that has only a 6-inch knee wall, and it's got a more gentle slope behind the wall. And I think the one over on your way to Penn Place will be so much more steeper. And I don't think they were even thinking of a 6-inch. I envisioned that they were going to do something, you know, higher. And I don't know if it was going to be with concrete, which is what we have over on the south side of the tennis court right there. They might even be doing some kind of you know, timber wall. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
It's only being thought about. There's nothing here that's
right. And that's why I was mentioning that we'll be bringing something up to the Arboretum Committee and Ziegler and Boyle and whoever else might want to be interested in throwing some comments at it, because it's an opportunity to do a few things in addition to replacing the sidewalk. And one of the things I'm looking at is trying to put some lighting in there, some type of aesthetically pleasing, but lighting of some variety, because it's very dark over there. Make it easier for people to see what they're doing. That is it for me. Thank you. Unless anybody's got any questions.
Thank you, Phil. I see Marion on, Marion Green, and Marion, this is to you and to everybody who served on the Historic Preservation Committee where the terms have since expired, but I do want to recognize you for dedication and service and length of time that you served on that committee, and your invaluable you know, knowledge and ability to share all the history there. So I just want to tell you how much we appreciate you having served on that committee for such a while. Didn't want that to go unnoticed, so thank you. With that, it's 8:20, and I think we're at the town manager's financial report and manager report.
Great, thank you, Kaki. As we always do, included in your agenda packet is an updated financial report. As I indicated in the memo to the mayor and town council, everything is looking pretty much on track, with the continued exception of local income taxes. Compared to the same period last year, we're down by approximately $40,000. I did have some additional communications with the state since our last meeting to see if they had any insight into what was going on in Garrett Park. We are not alone. Others are also seeing a decline. I haven't had a chance to work on it, but if we can provide them with a certain database of information, which I'm not sure if that exists or not, so that's something I need to look into. They might be able to do a little bit more digging, but at this juncture, why income taxes are down as much as they are is a mystery to me and to the state as well. We're also working on some other projects. Hopefully, I think George will be grateful if I ever get the RFP done for the Penn Place exterior painting. So continuing to work on that. Elizabeth and I, in lieu of issuing an RFP for a new copier printer lease, we are talking to some companies who have existing state contracts, because that will save us on the procurement process as well as get us better pricing, undoubtedly. One of the issues that we'll be bringing forward at a future town council meeting are some alternatives for improving the layout and efficiency of the town office space. This was a project that got started during Andrea's tenure. And then certainly, as Kaki noted, our maintenance staff is hard at work basically with the spring tree planting season, as well as kind of sprucing up some of the landscaped areas. If there's no questions about that, I would like to provide you all with an update kind of on where we're at with the 2022 town election. Are there any questions from anybody? Okay. I think as you,
Barb,
yes,
sorry.
yes, that's
I
okay,
just have one
Shirley.
question. I am
Sure.
interested in the election as well, but regarding the recommendations from the company that's helping out with the Penn Place space
Mhm.
review, will we be expecting like a report with recommendations? What are the next steps in terms of that process?
Yeah, there will be actually, Shirley, it's a good question, and thank you for bringing that up. My understanding from Andrea, as we kind of overlapped, is there were kind of one option, I guess, that I think they were asked to provide is sort of what's the best way we could use the existing space that we have, and kind of what were their thoughts about that. Some of the other options were what would happen, or what added benefits can we get from essentially incorporating into the town office either one or both of the spaces that were formerly leased to tenants. So there will be a written report sort of outlining kind of their assessment of all that. In addition, what they're currently working on is kind of developing at least some approximate cost estimates, because obviously as a decision-making body, it would be difficult for the next mayor and town council to basically really make a decision without the benefit of some financial information. So my hope is, I don't know if it'll be ready for the May meeting, but certainly no later than the June meeting.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Got a
Bill?
quick question. So,
Sure.
I know it might be jumping ahead, but any thoughts about replacing Butch, given that if he's going to retire in May, might want to have some overlap?
I think that's going to be fairly aggressive, Phil. We do not have yet an ad out on the street. I had a conversation with Butch, also a conversation with George, and I'll be talking to Frank this week because I'd like to get some input from them a little bit on kind of what the needed skills are. So I don't think there'll be any overlap with Butch, but I have talked to both Frank and George. I think they believe it's manageable for at least a short period of time. So I think anytime you have a job opening, at least my opinion is it's a good time to sort of step back and make sure you kind of think about how you're operating and what's the best way to fill the position. I think also, just since Phil raised this issue, I did want to just give you all an update of where we are with the kind of town manager recruitment. I think, as you all probably recall from last week, I was working with Mr. Deutsch of Mercer Group Associates, with your input, of course, to finalize the recruitment brochure. He did send me a proof of that over the weekend to take a look at, and just to do one more last read through, which I did with him on Sunday. So we should have the final brochure back and ads placed this week. So as soon as that is done, I will email you all and let you know that. We'll be advertising in the Maryland Municipal League, the International City County Management Association, which are pretty much sort of the kind of premier standards at the kind of national as well as state level. I believe Mr. Deutsch's intent is also to place ads with the Pennsylvania Municipal League, as well as the Virginia Municipal League. And obviously we'll put the notice on our own town website. So I'll give you a full report once again after I kind of finalize things with Mr. Deutsch this week. If there's no other questions, I do want to kind of just give you an update on where we are with the town election. As you all likely recall, the filing deadline for any prospective candidates to submit a petition was 5 o'clock today. We did not receive any petitions. So the candidates that we have is one candidate for mayor, Joanna Welch, two candidates for the two town council seats, Jerry Lee Bennett and Lisa Max. So we do have an uncontested election. As I notified the mayor and town council just shortly before the meeting, and some of you may not have even seen my email to you all. It would seem with an uncontested election that there is no reason to actually hold an election, but we are actually going to have to hold one, and I will explain that. We have no specific provision in our charter that basically allows the cancellation of an election when it's uncontested. There are certain municipalities in our immediate area, including Chevy Chase U, who have such a specific provision. In Garrett Park's charter, however, it basically states that officials are elected by the voters, and in consultation with the town attorney, Mr. Bolt, what that means is that the selection of those to be elected to office has to be done by a vote. I'm sure this is probably a little confusing for you all, as it might be for some of the residents, given that last year's uncontested election was in fact canceled. So Mr. Bolt and I had some communications about that. You likely recall that the town council amended the charter in 2020 amidst the pandemic to allow the cancellation of election when under a state of emergency. You subsequently amended that charter amendment in 2021, basically to kind of remove the reference specifically to 2020 and to basically broaden that time frame. As we talked about when we were talking about voting by mail, everything that was part of that charter amendment was linked to being under a state of emergency, which we obviously are not and have not been under for approximately 3 months. So once again, I did consult with Mr. Bolt on this. Because we are not under a state of emergency, he has opined that the town is required to hold an election this year, even though none of the races will be contested. I'm not an attorney, but certainly I've read a lot of charter and codes in my time, and at the risk of practicing law without a license, I would say I fully agree with Mr. Bolt's interpretation of everything. I think this does beg the question kind of at a future date, certainly not to be decided tonight, as to whether or not our charter should include a provision such as that is contained in Chevy Chase Youth Charter, that an election doesn't have to be held. Our charter does not allow for write-in candidates, as many do. So oftentimes that's what triggers an election. But certainly I think this is sort of a strange situation when you know sort of the outcome of the election without anyone even casting a single vote, but you have to have an election, but that's kind of where we're at. So given that, we do have to have an election, I did want to take this opportunity this evening to kind of revisit with you, if you so choose, as to whether or not you still want to proceed this year with using one of the voting technologies we had discussed, and specifically that was a voting machine, or whether or not we wanted to use a scanning option. So obviously both those options require an expenditure of funds at this juncture, because the filing deadline for petitions wasn't until 5 o'clock tonight. We have not incurred any cost for which we would be responsible with ElecTech. So with that, I'll just throw it open to any questions or comments that you all would like to share this evening.
So Barb, thank you very much for highlighting those important issues and the steps here. It sounds to me like you're asking council whether they would like to continue with the machine scanning of ballots or to go to a manual count. Is that
is
the
correct,
question that
Jackie.
are being asked? Okay.
Yes.
So council, how do you feel about that?
Being that
I
we
can just,
Sorry, okay, Phil.
being that we haven't amended the agenda to include a decision, can we even make a decision? I mean, for an official decision, because I thought we would have to have it under action items. I'm not trying to be a pain, but I'm just want to make sure we don't get ourselves wrapped around the axle here. That's all.
so the last discussion and agreement by council at the March meeting was to go ahead with the machine scanning, right? So in my view, I think that you certainly can make a change if you want. But, you know, we do a little bit of that variation all the time in these meetings. But where I'm coming from is sort of what Barb is saying is, you know, we've got this in play. We have to go forward with the election. We have the money. And, you know, this is, you know, I think at some point the town has to commit to deciding to use, you know, modern conveniences, if you will, for counting. And this is like a perfect opportunity to go ahead, even though it's an uncontested election, just go ahead and try the scanning and see how that goes. That's just my 2 cents, but you know, it is to the council's decision, really.
Okay, Donna.
Thanks. I just wanted to, having heard and read Barbara's thoughts and your thoughts on this, and the feedback of uncontested position. I mean, the fact that we have uncontested positions, I think it makes sense for us to move in this direction. And I think actually this would be a perfect time for the town to move in this direction, because should there be any issues, questions, or hiccups along the way, better for it to be at an election such as this than one that is highly contested or highly, you know, perhaps challenging. So I would definitely support the use of electronic services even for this election. It makes a good precedent, is my opinion.
Thank you, Donna. Mario or Jerry Lee, Phil, how do you feel about it? Shall we just keep going with this? I think your point was great, Donna. You said it better than I did.
Yeah, I mean, I'm personally torn. I'm torn. I mean, I think I get what the point Donna made and you made, Kaki. I don't disagree at all. I think we have to get to that point. I just feel like it's a little bit of it's almost premature. It's like a wasted exercise, because it's just basically we're doing it. It's almost like a trial run, basically what we're doing it just to do.
Yeah.
So and that's fine. If we have to, I mean, we have the money for it. It's not like we have plenty of cash on hand, as we all know from different emails. So I'm not going to stand in the way of progress. I just, if it's not a big lift to organize it, Bob, and get it prepared, then I would support it. But if it looks like it's going to be a cluster, I would be like, what are we doing?
I agree, but yeah, it's like a pilot in a way. Mario, you're seeing that the way I would too.
Barb, did you check in with the judges, and did they provide any recommendations in this regard? Our town election judges?
Most of our communication has been with our chief judge, who happens to be on the call, and I'm glad, Shirley, you said that, because that was going to be my next segue before making any further comments, is to suggest that Louise be given an opportunity to weigh in.
Yeah, and I think to have honest expectations is, you know, if people realize this is an uncontested election, what percentage of the population is going to turn out to actually vote? And I think that's the question of, you know, when you look at all the time and effort and everything that's put into an election, I would urge and throw my support to going back and changing the charter. I think there's a couple of things that have come out of the pandemic that have been better than what we had. And I think this is one of them. I think it's an uncontested election for the amount, whether you use an electronic and spend thousands of dollars, or whether you use just town staff and pay hundreds of dollars and hours, et cetera, for something that does not change anything the next day, is just, you know, I think we can do that. The other thing that I would include in this town charter update is, if we are going to use electronic means in the future, that we give a little more lead time between the time when all the filing has to be in and the financial reports and the actual the election itself, you need at least 6 weeks in there to, I think, to really deal with your company, give them a chance to print up, because they have to print up the ballots, we have to send out absentee ballots, et cetera. So, I mean, I think there's some revisions that we need to make to update us to really use the electronic system that, you know, that we have learned by just, you know, going by the seat of our pants through these last few years. So that's, you know, I looking forward, because that, again, you may get very little for your money this time if the people just decide not to show up to vote, because quotes, it's not going to change anything.
I agree with Louise. I'd be shocked if we get 100 folks voting. If there's if we just seriously.
Yeah. I mean, and I agree, Mario, and, you know, putting it in that perspective, it seems like a lot of money to pay for not a lot of value in terms of even getting a trial run of the methodology.
Barb, can you remind us how much we're talking about here? Because I recall 2,000, 2,500, if I'm not mistaken.
No,
Am I
it was more expensive than that. So we went through kind of some iterations from the March meeting. And by iterations, I mean Elizabeth and I talking to Elect Tech in terms of the likely number of absentee ballots and things like that. So where we ended up before this kind of latest wrinkle in terms of actually having to have an election regardless, we're looking at roughly $5,200 if we use the voting by using the scanner. If we're using the machine, sort of like what everyone's used to for, you know, voting in congressional elections, presidential elections, that's about $4,760. So as I mentioned, at this juncture, you know, Elect Tech, because we were waiting to see if anyone filed by petition, we've not incurred any cost whatsoever if we just sort of walk away from any of the technology options right now, because they haven't designed any ballots because we didn't know who would actually be on the ballot for them to design. And I would like to,
Would there be an
Yeah.
option of perhaps modifying that that contract for knowing full well what the situation is?
I think the only thing, I mean, a lot of the cost, and Louise and Elizabeth and I have talked about this, the vast majority of the cost has to do with the rental of the machine. I'll go through these with the scanning option. It's the design of the ballots, it's the actual use of the machine, and there is an Elect Tech rep on site, obviously, to help if there's any problems. Similarly, in terms of actually using, I think they call it the Danaker machine, you avoid the design cost, but there still is the actual rental of the machine. I mean, I can give you a more specific breakdown, but I don't want to bore everyone with a bunch of numbers. And you're also paying for the cost of someone from Elect Tech, you know, the delivery of the machine.
So, so Barb, if we don't do this, and Louise, we're talking about manpower. Just we still need folks to run the election, count the ballots. But I don't think. I mean, but reality is, there's not any like urgency to count the ballots because it's uncontested and we know who wins before the day even starts. So it's sort of like, you know, I'm sorry, I'm kind of being wishy-washy in this. I just see it as like I just see it as a waste of time, quite frankly, honestly. But that's just. But then again, I'm not running, and I don't. You know, I'm just a voter. So I mean, if you all want to do it, have at it, and I'll come vote. But I just think it's
Question.
It just
Yeah.
seems like get it prepared for next. You know, I don't know. I just seems like it's a big lift for not a lot of return.
Yeah, I got a couple of questions. One is, are the other judges still available? Because for a while we thought that there was not going to be any election, right? Or a little while. So do we still have the other judges available? Okay. The second thing is, all right, the second is, and forgive me if I'm pulling this out of, you know, some dark hole that doesn't make sense here, but was there the idea that if there was such a majority of votes that you could prematurely call the the election, or is that just by, you don't have to count provisionals or absentee? Maybe that's where it was. No?
It doesn't matter. If you have an election, you count all the ballots, period.
Okay.
And again,
All right.
if we rent these machines, the tech, et cetera, it's full steam ahead. There's no half an election. Because every ballot is respected, it's counted, it counts, and that's it. Now, whether it determines an outcome of an election, that's something else. So, and you also have to have your poll workers. It's not just one person that's involved, and we have to have the poll workers, the people to register, all that type of thing, whether or not you have the electronic people there too.
Right.
And then
Right.
we're trying to work with time and, space within COVID type masks and, post office spacing, et cetera, et cetera. So it gets more tricky because you can't, again, an election is a big event, literally, compared to, as far, and it doesn't matter what, again, once you started, it's the whole shebang.
Okay. So one other thing to remind everybody about, just in case somebody tries to call us up on this, but I think by charter or ordinance now, we had, you had to have like 60 days notice to residents about the procedure, the process. We had to have something in place like 60 days, or was it 30 days before the election? So we had done that with the scanning or whatever electronic means. But there have been years in the past where we didn't always meet that deadline. So I'm just letting people know that to me is not a criteria that you have to fall on a sword about. So if council chooses to change this back to a manual process, I think there's enough understanding here, given the unanticipated circumstances and unique circumstances, we can go ahead and make that change. So I still, again, bounce it back to council.
I have another question, if it's okay. How many fewer people would it require to work? I'm assuming it's going to be considerable. But how much less manpower do we need if we use the electronic machines?
Louise, please jump in here, but on the day of the election itself, Donna, you still need, as I think Louise was alluding to, you still need your election judges, you still need your poll workers. I think the difference between the technology, kind of looking ahead, is what happens after the polls close, basically. So, but I don't think, whichever way we go, it doesn't change what's needed during the day. As I think Louise is saying, you don't have an election. You're all in either way in terms of the reason for
the reason for my question was because of the current health situation. The pandemic is again spiking up, and was wondering if there would be perhaps a good reason not to have even less people present.
Well, I think the one thing that we had talked about when I first reached out to Louise to even kind of introduce myself and to talk about elections is we had talked about possibly doing something, outside under tents. Obviously, if we're using machines that require a plug, some of the locations that we had talked about outside go out the window because there's no plug. So I think there's just a number of variables in play. But I think, Louise, you had suggested at one point, maybe just outside of Penn Place by the tennis courts, I believe, before we started talking about technology. But certainly the use of either the scanner or the actual Daneker machines requires a certain proximity to an outlet.
Really long extension cord? Actually, I think there's an outlet right next to the court, to tell you the truth.
Well, there's an outlet to the
There are
basketball.
logistics. There are logistics that can easily get around. I wouldn't worry about extensions and outlets. We have them around Penn Place building, outside, as well as
Actually, I think there's one right next to the courts anyway.
there is. Yeah, we had that installed, actually.
Well, again, an election is going to be a town event. So we're going to be asking anybody who has the knowledge or anything to let us do this. We're going to need everybody, because this is not going to be a quotes normal, usual type election. And as I said, hopefully going forward in the future, future planning, we can have a lawyer and, a manager go through this, write up something appropriate to, go back and change the town charter long-term so that we don't have to do this again. But this is going to be a unique election, but it's, this Garrett Park, we're all unique, so.
All right, so
Well put.
it's 8:47. What do you want to do, council? You want to go to the manual, or do you want to go forward with scanning?
I'll throw my 2 cents in, but I would think it would be a good idea to do the trial and go through it, because if we have problems and hiccups, yeah, it's going to cost us a bunch of money. I understand for sure.
Not a
but
lot of money, but
It's not a lot of money, really. I would agree. That's why I was asking Barb. Sorry, I agree with you.
Right, because I think if we have hiccups or problems, we find out these people don't work, whatever, fill in the blank, we've got the opportunity to do it, figure it out, move on. I mean, if we contested election next year, whatever, then at that point, we've hopefully got our ducks in a row, and it'll be a little bit easier because we've gone through this whole fire drill once. Plus, you don't have to count the things at night or worry about the fact that I think there's a limited amount of time. You can't spend weeks waiting to count the ballots. So
yeah, and you can consider it baby steps. I mean, we may not have, the hundreds and, the several hundreds of residents voting this time, who knows? But even a small number, that's what you do with random sampling. So, statistically, you're starting to kind of get there. And then next year, if there is a contested or not, it doesn't even matter. But if we go again forward with scanning, it's a little bit more, you gotta think of this as sort of the baby steps to get there. And I don't think the risk is so high not to do it. So, but
There's no risk. There's no risk, dude. There's no risk. I'm not going to get in the way of progress. Sounds like we have two. I'll support it as well. So if somebody wants to put it up for, if we need to do anything to move forward, that's fine.
Jerry Lee, how do you feel about it?
Yeah, I'm not going to push hard against it either.
So we'll just proceed. And are we deciding here, Barb, whether we're just doing the scanning or we're actually going to even flip it to the machine? There were two variations on that technology.
Right. The guidance or direction that I got at your prior meeting was that you preferred the scanner because it would allow us in future years to basically scan absentee ballots that were designed. Once again, they do have to be designed by Electech. That was your prior direction. Certainly you're not, you don't have to be married to that. I think the difference between using the machine is, there is some fairly easy setup. Any absentee ballots do have to be counted by hand. I think if you stick with your previously stated preference for using the scanner, there will just be, some time involved in actually developing the absentee ballots, and that will still need to be mailed out. I think whichever way you want to go, and Louise, please, once again, feel free to jump in and give your opinion here. I just think if you want to try technology this year, I think it's probably a little bit of a whiplash to try one form of technology this year and then change it next year, but that's my own sense. Louise, do you have an opinion on that?
Let me just throw one thing in.
Okay,
I had
I'm sorry.
suggested if we go with the scanner, and the reason was because it left a paper trail. If somebody wants to count the ballots later on, they can do so because the other method, yes, there will be a printout, but if people wanted to argue, they could argue, but at least the scanner method, there's hard copy generated each time somebody votes.
I remember that, yeah.
Well, if it's good enough for a presidential election, wouldn't it be good enough for us? Just saying.
I like the idea of the scanning. It's the baby step again, right? Sort of, we have that paper trail too.
Yeah, there's no right or
baby
wrong.
steps, absolutely.
And in the information we gathered, the scan we could do with one machine, which is a very large machine, but it's a simple one. And if it didn't work or they had mechanical problems and they couldn't get it to work, et cetera, we would still have the paper ballots. if you go to the machine, we were going to have at least 2 voting machines because again, you don't want people to show up and have, one machine that's never had it before and one tech there and have problems or people a long line waiting to vote because it takes people, they're disoriented when they first approach this machine. It has like a curtain that closes around you in the back, et cetera. So we were going to have 2 voting machines on that, and we would not have our own paper ballots. You'd be totally relying on the machine itself. The person put their input in the machine and then it's a black box. So again, there's no right or wrong. And all these are reasonable type things. And I just, it's another one of these things that, during these last 2 years, pigs fly and, you deal with as they come up and you try to make the best of what you have, but you also use it as a learning curve that, again, what can we do in the future that would make more sense, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. So I think we're back to where council had agreed that we'd go forward with some modern technology. And I think the common denominator here is the use of a scanner. Is that right? And I see everybody shaking their heads.
It would seem so, yes.
Okay. So have you got your answer then, Barb?
Yes, I do. Thank you all. I will email Electech as soon as this meeting is over and let them know that we're going to proceed with the scanning options, and I will give them the names to be listed on the ballot.
Along those same lines, may I ask, what is the procedure we'll need to follow? Should we, which I hope we would, put this in the town charter or understood that this is the process going forward, that it's an electronic election?
I
Well,
wouldn't
not
put that in
specific
the
as to-
charter.
Yeah, I
wouldn't
think,
put-
I'm sorry, what I would suggest is, and certainly this will obviously any kind of charter amendment or code amendment, first of all, I'd like to get the input of our judges. But I think as Louise was alluding to earlier, I think the name of the game here is kind of flexibility and taking the experiences that I think everyone has learned in particular the last couple years, and trying to build in as much flexibility as we can into the charter and the code. Louise, is once again, I just want to make sure that we have the benefit of your expertise since you're on the call. Anything you'd like to add?
I would totally go for changing the charter as to like Chevy Chase and many other localities have done that have probably gone through this step on the way. I mean, you don't go there until you realize you have a pothole. Is that, if you're not changing the outcome, is there reason to have an uncontested election have to have a vote? Because we can change the charter to say that if it's an uncontested election, like we did for this revision during this COVID times of the last 2 years, we can change the charter to actually word it so that an uncontested election would proceed with people still filing their financial reports. And then the date of the election, they would be declared the winners if it's uncontested, and they would take their positions. So you don't have to say, you're going to have an, what kind of election. You can just, but an uncontested election, I would definitely define in really concrete terms. And then the other thing is, if we are going to have an election, I would set that 6-week time period from the time that everything has to be in and our list is complete to the time of the election. And then that gives us the flexibility to use whatever electronic means. I don't think you have to specify that you're going to use electronic means.
No, I don't think you want to be locked into there. You never know when
Yeah,
things.
and it's up to the council. I mean, you have to have, and it's hard to change a charter. And, we're all going to be gone when they are looking at it and say, what are those crazy people thinking of when they did this back in 2022? So, I mean, you lose the history. So you try not to tie people's hands that you don't have to, or hook them to technology that may change. I mean, God only knows what they'll have in 50 years.
Yeah, and I think if I can just tag on briefly to what Louise said is obviously the town used vote by mail back in 2020 because of the pandemic. And hopefully, I'm sure we all hope we will never go through something like we have in the last couple of years with everyone being isolated, but there certainly could be a time and a place where we go through another instance of a pandemic where you don't want to have an in-person election. So I think these are all issues we can work out. I did want to just strongly echo Louise's comments about the time frame. One of the things Louise and Elizabeth and I have spoken about is just the fact that people can file petitions up to 21 days before the election, which is a very short turnaround time. Even if we were doing the past way of voting, I was contacted by a Garrett Park resident who is deployed overseas and wanted to vote in his town election. And certainly we're going to get him an absentee ballot. But if you think about not even knowing who's running for office until 21 days before the election, and then absentee ballots having to be returned by the time the polls close, I think the short turnaround time, I'm afraid, may also make it difficult, for those who are serving our country overseas who want to still participate in the civic process to actually receive and return an absentee ballot by the deadline. So I think Louise's comments about just reviewing the timeframes in general and maybe pushing those back some, I think is very prudent advice to the mayor and town council.
I'd also like to clarify that the charter says at least 21 days. So it's really been up to council and the town office to decide what the actual timeline would be. We didn't have to wait till the 21st day before election, because the charter says at least 20 nominations have to be set at least 21 days before. So let's just be mindful of how we interpret the wording. But that's not to say I don't disagree. I think maybe just moving the whole thing further, so we're not at least 21 days before an election, we're maybe 30 days before an election, but it is that wording at least. And I think that kind of got things, got some confusion there going. Anyway, I think we got our answer. We got our direction, right? So I would like to say it's 8:58, unless there's anything else. I'd like to adjourn the meeting.
I would like to thank Louise for her time and expertise this evening. Thank you, Louise.
Thank you.
Again, just be willing to lend a hand or an opinion, et cetera, as we go through this, because I said it's going to take a lot of smiles and everybody just taking a lot of tolerance. So thank you.
Hey, I'd like to also thank Kaki for her time in the last 4 years of commitment to the town. I know this is your last town council meeting. So on behalf of the town, and I'm sure everyone on this call, want to thank you for your commitment. It's no small task, and it goes for those who've served in town in any capacity. Know that it's a handful of us to do this, and thank you, Kaki, for doing that for the last 4 years.
Here, here.
Thank you.
Yes.
It's my honor to do that, and a ditto right back to you, Mario, since you're not up again, and you gave us a lot of your time as well as council members. So I appreciate that too, and we all do. So
Yes,
On
thank you,
that
Kaki. Thank you, Mario.
all
Thank
right.
you,
Yes.
Mario.
Really.
Thank you,
Thank you, both of you.
everybody. All right, thank you. Have a great night, everybody. All right.
Bye.
Thanks, Barb.
Same.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.